Committing the cephalosporin generations to memory is a big challenge. Not only do you have a lot of quirky names that are similar sounding, but you have to memorize the generations themselves. So let's talk about that, and you're going to get a bunch of mnemonic examples, starting with cephalosporin itself. Now, one of the things that I thought of immediately was just to think of cellophane and having someone try to pour some favorite drink of mine into it. So that has, some obvious sorts of relationships: cellophane, cephalosporin, and then porin, and so forth. And you can imagine maybe it's not your favorite drink. To make it a little more memorable, having some icky drink filled with spores. I think of maybe that David Cronenberg movie Existenz, where they have the spores. And so that might be even better than what I was originally thinking with my favorite drink, having it infected with spores. I think the guy who discovered the cephalosporin in the first place was Giuseppe Brozzu. I'm not sure how you say that last name, but it's something like that. And Giuseppe has that kind of p sound in it that's in cephalosporin. So you may consider learning a little bit about the history and just watching for opportunities like that to add the history as a mnemonic device to whatever it is that you need to memorize. Anyway, let's look at the first generation and think about how that we can just make it a little easier to memorize. So we have all of these similar sounding names, and we kind of want to look at what's common to as many of them as possible, and how we're going to group them using chunking so that we can remember they're the first generation. So we have the pharaoh, for example, would really, really help here because you have this f. And then it's just a matter of having the pharaoh interact with different drugs, right? So we have cephalotin. So the pharaoh is doing something with tin. If you have a number system, like I sometimes teach on this channel, which, by the way, if you're new here, hit thumbs up, get subscribed. It is easy to use your number system in here as well, because for me, 12 is Tintin, and so I would have him on there. And we just keep on going through this. So cefazolin. Then now we would have, something for Zoe, like I know a person named Zoe, and maybe she's playing the violin, and so forth. But playing the violin to the pharaoh, right? And that is part of what makes it more memorable. But how do we get to the first generation? Well, this is where I would suggest you have a number object system. So for example, the pharaoh can always have a candle. So if my friend Zoe is playing a violin to the pharaoh can be responding by holding a candle to the violin, thereby setting it on fire or at least endangering Zoe. And this is a very, very powerful way to start building these associations and knowing that it is the first generation. I'm going to share with you the second generation in a minute, but let's skip to the third generation because we're going to talk about the memory palace with the second generation in particular. But here, if we think about these kinds of images, just more examples. Just look for what is suggested in the word. We have opera zone basically in cephoperazone, right? And we can try and figure this out. I have a friend named Seth. Not everybody has a friend named Seth, but you could maybe insert a friend named Stephanie, Steph, in there perhaps. But we're going to basically just remember this because of the cephalosporin mechanism, right? And so we just move from there and then have opera, and they're standing in an opera zone. And, Frank Zappa, I think it was, had Joe's Garage, which is like a rock opera. And I don't remember the exact line, but I think it's borrowed from Blade Runner or something. He's always saying that, the white zone is for unloading and loading only, something like this. And you can think of a zone in the opera, like the opera has some sort of unloading zone as part of the music. And then, ceftazidime, I think that's probably how that's pronounced. But if not, whatever, it's got the word dime in it. So you could imagine a dime, and ideally you're going to put it in a memory palace. If you want more details about this, by all means, please help support the channel with a thumbs up. That really helps, and getting subscribed helps as well. You can also check out my book, How to Learn and Memorize Medical Terminology, and if you happen to get one, that helps with the channel. Basically, it means more is more. And I love to create these for you. Thank you so much for making that possible. If we want to go to the memory palace level, then we can think about something like second generation and having all the second generation cephalosporin drugs in one area. And so if we take cefoxitin, for example, and we put it in a room, one way to remember that it's the second generation would be to have it be in the second part of the memory palace. All the second generation cephalosporin drugs are now in the second room of the memory palace. And that's one way. Another way is to add a number image. So we talked about the candle object shape, but what about adding a swan for 2? Because swans sort of look like 2. Or for example here, 3 is kind of like a mustache on its side or a pair of handcuffs. Whatever image that you come up with, you can gather them all together, have them all in one memory palace that represents 3, but also add an image. So the cool thing to look for is opportunities. Like foxes hunting swans already helps you create an association. Swans look like 2. So having it organized in a memory palace, there's different ways to do it, and there's much more to number systems. So if you're interested in more number systems, please continue watching videos on this channel. One where I go deeper into number systems is when we talk about lab values, and there's a couple of lab values and magnesium level videos that we go through number systems in greater detail so that you can pick them up. And of course, they're covered in How to Learn and Memorize Medical Terminology. But as a quick review, basically we've got to start with learning the actual core words. So I gave an example for cephalosporin overall. Giuseppe Brozzu, I'm pretty sure, is the guy who discovered them. He has a key in his name, and you know, with that hard P, that's itself a hook. And then just try to bridge things together as much as possible. If you can look for patterns, yeah, you can use the Pharaoh. Obviously, when we get to cephridine, well, it changes it. It's not as close to Pharaoh, but you could stick with the Pharaoh and put infrared glasses on his eyes. And then for Dean, you know, you can have him with someone who's named Dean, and you may not know a Dean personally, but there's certainly actors, singers, Dean Martin, for example. Get them involved and try to elaborate it as much as possible. And when you're just adding an object like a candle to the image, the candle represents 1, so you're always going to know that it is a first generation drug. So a very simple way of doing things. Obviously, you need to experiment yourself. The more you personalize these images, the more they're going to function for you. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and if you need more help, come visit me at magneticmemorymethod.com.